Hey everyone, welcome back. So in this video I just wanted to recap where we are up to so far in the class, and then I'm going to jump over into what we're going to cover for this week's session as well. So to begin with, we've managed to get our beetle to the final point here. He's also textured, so last week we worked on the texturing for the beetle. I have this set up in Blender now as well with the texturing. And so this week we're going to work on the rig. So we're actually going to rig the asset and make sure that we can move this guy. So by the end of this week, we should have different controls in here. We can have controls to move the legs. So we'll have some IK support for these areas. We'll be able to open up the shell as well, rotate these bones here. We can also move the individual areas like the tendrils and the horns and things like that, and rotate the head. And also have a control for the body so we can start to move things around. So that's the aim for this week, and we're going to cover that in the following videos. Hey everyone. So before we get into actually rigging our robot here, there's a couple of organizational things I want to cover first before we jump in there. So the first one is setting up the material. So we'll just cover that side of things here. So we're just going to show roughly how I set up the shaders for this and how we get the textures and everything coming in here. So the first thing to do, we'll select, if I come in here and select one of these guys, we'll select the head as a material. So the first part is in Substance Painter, you're just going to want to export out the textures. So you export those out. I used the Unreal 4 template preset for those, which channel packs the individual textures here. And then you can see that we have our shader set up if you've got the add-on Node Wrangler installed, you just go to Preferences, and then on the add-on, just search for Node Wrangler. You can see this guy here. This is really useful for working with shaders and materials. And so if we didn't have this guy connected here, if we just disconnect this, you can press Control T and it's going to add an image texture with the mapping and everything here. So we can actually set up our texture, and then you just hit open and import that texture there. So if I go and connect this back up, and then for the different textures here, I have the following kind of color spaces set. So for the base color, I have Filmic sRGB. And then for the roughness and metallic and the normals, I'll set those to non-color. And then to set up the roughness and the metallic, I have green channel plugged in here to the roughness and the blue into the metallic of the principal BSDF shader. And then for the normals, I'm actually just inverting the green channel here using RGB curves, and then I set normal map there and plug that in. So that's the setup. And I actually, for this one, for the head, I have an emissive, so I'm also just plugging the emissive in as well. So really basic shader setup, but I just wanted to cover that just in terms of how to set the materials up inside of Blender if you don't know how to do that. If you're working with another 3D program, the process will probably be fairly similar depending on what type of editor you're working with. So I just wanted to briefly cover that. In terms of the setup and that side of things, so let's just briefly cover that. We'll turn the rig off here. So there's a couple of things to bear in mind. So firstly, because this is a hard surface object, I'm not really doing any weight painting. I'm mostly just binding individual elements to individual bones, which means that because it's mechanical, everything moves individually, and it's a little bit easier to rig and animate this. So it's going to be relatively straightforward to get a rig working for this type of thing. But in terms of organization, we worked before in the class with this idea of having collections, and we use the collection instances, and then we can reference things. So you can see here that we have the beetle body, and we have the moving plates and different parts of the object, right, set up depending on what's going on here. So that's the same as what it was before. The structure is the same as how we had before. So we had the head in here, we have the legs and everything in the same way, right? But one of the things I wanted to do is take all of that stuff and then make it into collections that are actually going to be useful for rigging. So if I just cover that briefly, that's what we can see here. So a lot of this is just a copy of what we had before, but let's kind of roughly go over it. So for the legs, I've separated those out. These, again, are in individual collection instances as they were before. And for this one particularly, I have the bottom of the feet separated out into the individual pieces that are most likely to be moving, so you can see all of that. But again, these are all just in collection instances. and I have all of the left rigs in a folder, all of the left legs, sorry, I should say, in a folder, and then the same for the right. So this is going to be mirrored, so I'm keeping these separate so that I can mirror the bones and then bind them later. So the legs are probably the most complicated piece just because there's a lot of individual sections that you have to go and individually bind to bones, but it's not super difficult to do. So that's that. And then same process for the tendrils. So tendrils, again, these are controlled within the collections. You can see that these are all individually chunked out into their different pieces, and I do the same for the left and the right. So again, same kind of process there. For the head, we have everything in the head rig, and we also have our head and our horns separated because I wanted to individually rotate the horn and allow a bone to do that. So I have to break that out into its own section there, but that's for the head. And then for the body, this is, again, same kind of idea. We have most of the pieces from the body just in this particular area. That's all of these combined in that section there. And then I have the shell is the individual shell pieces. These are split out again into their own collection. So you can see here left and right side. For moving plates, we're not going to cover too much of this with the rig in the tutorial, but this is for actually rotating and creating the simple primitive shape. And then we have our wings, which we will cover in the tutorial here. These are these guys. So when this all comes together, all of the individual pieces are easily selectable, and we can bind those to the individual bones. So that's the some of the structure and the hierarchy part of this, and then we'll get into actually rigging things. Hey everyone. So now we've covered some of the setup and the basics of the structure for this week. I wanted to jump straight into some of the armature side of things and actually setting up our rig and getting bones bound to different parts of the object. So the first thing we're going to do here is you can keep this yourself organized. I would put the rig, I've got a separate folder in here, and I can just put my rig in here. It's up to you where you locate it. But the first thing you're going to do is just hit Shift A, and you're going to add in an armature. This is going to add in a single bone. So if we go underneath this armature, you can see that we have a bone actually bound to the object underneath there. So that's kind of the first step here. So we get the bone, and we can jump into edit. Object mode is going to move the armature around and that kind of side of things. And then as soon as we hit edit, we're actually editing our individual bones. So then we can Shift D and duplicate and create a new bone, and so on and so forth. So that's the sort of basics of working with armatures. You jump between the two different modes. While you're in object mode, you can also hit Control Tab, and this is going to bring you into pose mode. So once we start to actually bind things and we want to test how this is moving, we're going to be in pose mode, which means that we can actually pose the bones and move the object. So Control Tab to jump out of that mode. So, okay, so that's some of the basics. I want to start by just getting some bones set up. So the first thing I would usually do when I'm working with an armature is just scale my bone down. So we can actually select our bone and then use the 3D cursor to scale the bone. So we can scale this one down here. I'm going to create a root bone, which is basically, usually for rigs, you'll want a bone that controls the whole object. So if you want to move everything, you want to offset the rig, or you wanted to slightly rotate it, it's very useful to have a root bone. So this is the main bone here that's going to be added to the rig. So we add that one there, and then I'm just going to create a series of bones from this root. So the first one, I'm just going to duplicate up a bone here, and then we'll just move him. So we have this bone here, and we can see at the moment that we can't really see our bones if they're hidden underneath the object. So there's a few things you can do to counteract that. You can come under the rig options here, and under viewport displays, there's a couple of controls we can set here. So the first one is if we set in front, we're always going to see our bones in front of the rest of the objects there. So that's a handy little tip if you're working with your bones and you want to make sure you always see them. We can also visualize the bones in different ways. So at the moment, these are set to octahedral bones, but we could choose different types. So you can see we can go for stick bones or B bones or envelopes, so on and so forth. So I actually like working with the B bones. These are just a lot more squared out bones, but they create these really large shapes. So we can actually scale these in by holding Control Alt and S, and we can scale the bones. So this is pretty handy if you want to work with these sort of more square bones. You can do that. But either is fine. It's just a visualizer. So if you wanted to work with the octahedral ones as well, that's also fine. So for this bone, I'm going to move our pivot back to the bounding box, and I'm just going to rotate him. So this is going to be our main body bone, and for this, I don't actually really need to deform the body. So I don't need, if I was working, say, with a spine, for example, I might start to extrude this out and create more of this type of result. But because this is hard surface and I'm not going to bend these elements really, I'm just going to have a singular body bone. So we'll just rename that to be body, and you can see that there. Another handy visualizer is the names, which will show the names of the bones over the top as well. So we can actually see what these are called, so we don't get our names mixed up and everything there as well. And then next I want to Shift D and duplicate, and we'll rotate, and we'll now create one that's going to be called our head bone. So this is the head. We could also create ones for the horns and things like that as well, but I just want to cover the basics to begin with, and then we can expand as we go. So that's the first step. We've just got a couple of bones in there. So the first thing we want to try and do is actually bind a couple of these objects to this, so we can actually come into here and unhide some of the different elements that we have. So we've got our legs and our tendrils, we've got our head. So for the head, we're going to want to bind that to this main head bone. And so the way you do that is jump into pose mode and make sure that the bone you want to parent this object to is selected. So you can see here that I can just select those in pose mode, jump out of pose mode, and then select the head first and the bone second. And we're just going to hit Control P and parent this directly to the bone. So now what you see is if you enter into object mode, or into pose mode, sorry, as we move this bone around, as we rotate this, you can see that we can actually rotate our head. So that's the basic process of actually parenting different objects to the individual bones. So let's just kind of carry on with our process here. So for the body, we're going to also want to just bind this to the body. So come into pose mode, select the body, and then we'll just Control P and bind this. So now we should have the body here. You can see that that's all working. But as we move the body, you can see that the head is not coming with it. So in this case, we'd actually want, as we move the body, for the head to also come with that bone, right? So one of the ways we can do that is come over into edit mode, and we actually expand this. You can see this is our hierarchy of bones at the moment. So the first thing we want to do is parent the head to the body bone. So you just select the head first and the body second, and then we'll just hit Control P. And we want to keep the offset. So these aren't going to be connected together. They're going to be separate bones. So we'll just hit keep offset. And you can see now this is parented under a hierarchy. And then we can do the same for the body and the root, because as we move the root, we want everything else to come with it. So we'll do the same here. And so we actually need to select our body first and our root second. And now you can see that this is parenting correctly. So now as we move these things, if we jump out of edit mode into object mode and into pose mode, as we move the head, you can see that the body comes with it. As we move the root, you can see everything is coming with it as well. So that's how this works. So if we move the head separately, that's how that's going to work. So that's some real basics in terms of the hierarchy of just getting these elements and everything set up, which is working pretty nicely already. So next I want to do some of the other parts of the object here. So we're going to set up our horn and also the shell, I think, as well. So we got our shell area. We'll cover the wings separately because they're a little bit more complicated. So yeah, the shell and the horn, that will get the majority of the body and different parts done. And then we can move on to our legs after that. So so for the shell, let's do the, I'm going to do this guy first. But you can see that because this is a collection instance, his pivot isn't really in a particularly great place. His pivot is the center of the world. So it's a little bit difficult if I wanted to, say, rotate this horn. So I need to actually place my bone in a place that makes sense. And you can see that when I built this, I have this cylinder of where this actually is connecting, right? And how it's going to rotate to the body. So I need to put a bone kind of in this place here, right? So to do that, we're just going to unhide the rig and re-enable this section, which now means we can select these different elements. of the actual pieces, right? And so what I'll do is I'll select where the bone needs to go, and I'm just going to hit Shift S and choose cursor to selected, right? So that moves our cursor there. And now to set up a bone, all we're going to do is we're going to duplicate our head bone, and then I'm just going to Shift S and selection to cursor. So that's actually going to move my bone. We can scale the bone down a little bit, and now you can see we have this head bone here. So we're going to want to name this slightly differently. We're going to want to call this horn. So this is our horn bone. And at the moment, if we try to, again, if we come out of object mode or into object mode, sorry, and move the head, you're going to see that the horn isn't going to come with it. So we're going to need that same parenting hierarchy again. So we'll go into edit and we'll just parent our horn bone to the head. So now that as we move the head, come into pose mode, the horn is also going to move with it, right? Now we want to actually set up the horn to this area. So we're just going to come into pose mode again, select the horn, and then we're just going to parent our horn there. So that's nice and simple. And now as you see, we rotate this guy, you're going to see that this comes with it, right? Which is pretty good. At the moment, this section isn't actually rotating with the horn. So if we wanted to do that, we can just move this element into that collection. So these pieces here, we can just come out of our rig and select the low poly. And then if we come over into here, we have these different areas of the head and the fibers and everything here. So I think actually, just looking at this, so now we would want to essentially move these pieces that we can see here into our horn folder. So if we turn off the horn and then select these different elements that are part of the horn that we want to rotate. So you can see, yeah, so I'm going to move these into the horn. And then what we should see now, if we go back to our rig, is that this is now part of the horn. So you can see those pieces are back. They've updated in that collection. So when I rotate this, you'll see that these guys also rotate with it, right? So that's how we actually get that horn working. If we were to move a bunch of things in pose mode by mistake or rotate them, scale them, whatever, to reset the whole rig, we're just going to hold Alt and then click Alt R, Alt G, and Alt S, which is actually just going to move, scale, and reset our rig back to default. So if you ever run into that issue as you're posing things, you can reset everything. So now we set up the horn there. I now need to do the same process, but with the shell. So for the shell, I actually have these little sections in here. This is the pivot of where the shell actually rotates from. So we need to just come over into our object again and add in a collection instance for that. So we'll select this object here. Sorry, not a collection instance, just move the pivot into that location. So we'll do the same trick again, and we'll just come in here and enable this. And now we want to set up our shell bone. So to do that, duplicate the bone again. And this one, let's just have a look and rename this. So this is going to be shell. And so we're going to just move that into this position. We'll probably just move the bone down in scale a little bit there. So that's for our shell. And then what we want to do with this is, because this is going to be on the left side of the model, we also want the same on the right side. So if you're working with symmetry in rigs, the way that you do that is you come into the actual bone and then you put a .L for left side or .R for right side. And then if we come over into the edit mode again and we come to Armature, there's an option here called Symmetrize, and what that will do is it will duplicate the bones to the other side, but you can see now that we have shell.r, so we have the left side and the right side of our rig, right? So that's really basic workflow, for symmetry. And so again, we want to parent these guys to the body, so we'll select both of these and then select the body and just parent and keep offset. So now we have our body actually controlling the shells as well. So if we come over into pose mode, you can see that the shells are going to move. So to now parent the actual shell to this guy, again, it's the same process. So we'll come over with the rig selected into pose mode, select the bone we want, and then just parent to the bone. So now if we come over to pose mode, we could actually move our shell around, which is pretty cool. And then we just want to do the same for the other side of the shell. So we'll select the shell piece, we'll select the object, and then we're just going to parent to the bone. So that's our basics of our rig setup for all of the body and everything here. So you can see that we have parented all of the body pieces. As we move this around, everything is looking good. We can open up the shell now, which is pretty nice. And we can rotate the head and move the head, and then rotate the horn as well, moving the roots. So you can see all of the bones that we've set up. A couple of things that you can also do that's kind of handy is you can lock the transform. So when you're working with bones, I usually set these to the X, Y, Z Euler here, which is just removes these X, Y, W, X, Y, Z values and puts them to just X, Y, Z, right? It's just a bit more intuitive to work with. And then what you can do here is you can lock certain values. So for the head, for example, I don't really want the head to be moved or scaled. So you can just hit these lock icons and that will only allow me to rotate it. Even if I try to press G or S to scale, it's just going to force me to only rotate, right? And then when we get to things like this, we can do the same thing, but we know that we only want this to rotate in the one axis, which in this case is the X axis. So we can lock everything except the X, which just means that when you rotate this now, it's only going to rotate in that one axis. We can't rotate it weirdly. So that's, again, pretty handy to do. These guys we will leave all unlocked. For the body, I would probably just lock the scale because I don't want to be able to scale him, but I do want to be able to move him around and rotate him as well. And then for these guys, this is mostly just a rotation thing, so we can do the same thing and just unlock the rotation only. So these won't move, they'll just rotate around. So that's just a little bit of tidy up that we can do on the rig there. Hey everyone. So now we've covered the basics of setting up our armature and our bones, and we've bound some of the different objects to the bones. We're going to set up our leg rig. So for the leg, what I actually did was I set up the bones and then I just mostly used an IK rig for the legs, because in this case I didn't want super precision about where I'm posing the actual things. But if I wanted to add that support later on, I can always add a switch for the FK and the IK bones. But in this case, I mostly just used the IK solution. So, but we can cover that. So the first thing that we want to do as far as setting up our leg is we're going to select our armature, and then we're going to come into edit mode. We're going to duplicate our bone, and we want that most likely to be parented to, say, the body. So we have, depending on the leg, right, this one here is going to be parented to the body because it's connected to the body, and then this one here is going to be connected to the head. So in this case, we're going to want to just duplicate our head bone. That's going to create our first bone here. So if we expand everything, we've got these different sections. So we had the femur, the tibia, and then these foot pieces. So the first bone we're going to create here is the femur, and we're just going to call that femur underscore left. And then we want to move this into place. So we select the bone. This is set up so that it rotates around from the point where we actually want this to orientate here. So to do that, we'll just move this guy. We'll select this and we'll just do a cursor to selected, and then we'll just move our bone cursor to selected there. The next one is also in the right place for us here. So again, we can just move our cursor to selected, and then we can select this guy and move the bone there. So you can see that we've got this set up pretty nicely already. Next up, we can extrude out a bone here. So we'll extrude a bone here, and then we need to select this part, which is going to be where our next bone is connected. So we'll select this guy, and then we're going to select the end of the bone and just do selection to cursor. So now we have this guy here, and now we can start to rename our bones as well. So this one is the tibia, so we'll just rename that tibia. And then we have these foot pieces. So for the foot pieces, I want to basically extrude the bones into each one of these individual areas here. So we'll do that. It's relatively easy. The first thing you want to do is just select this end piece and just press E to extrude. And we'll extrude it roughly to where we know we want the individual pieces there. So I'll select that there. And then come into these and just rename them all. So the first one, I'm just going to call these feet or foot underscore left here. And then we'll do foot 02 left. And then we'll just duplicate that and call this one 03. So we've got the different feet pieces there, which is all looking pretty good. And then next we want to have bones for these individual areas here. So for these ones, I'm going to actually duplicate these and have them separated because I don't need them. I don't want them to be connected. So for this one, and you can see that at the moment, these bones are twisting as well, right? So we can come and fix the twisting in a second for these bits. But to fix the twist on this bone, you're just going to set your roll to 0. So that's going to reset this to be flat. And then I can just move this first bone roughly into this position, which is going to be for this section here. So you can see we have this piece. We want to be able to kind of rotate that section. So we need a bone for that. And then we also need a bone for the claw. So you can just extrude out your bone and then just move that roughly into position for the claw. So we have our bones, we can move it down if we want it to line up with the claw a bit better as well, or we can just leave it there. So that's the basics of these. And then what we'll do is we'll set names for these ones as well. So we're going to call this one claw base .l. And then this final one we'll just call claw.l. So that gives us our naming structure and everything here. We do want this to be parented to this, but we'll do that in a second. I want to also just duplicate our bones for this guy, and we'll just move these roughly into position for now. We can line these up a bit better in a second. So cool. So that's got our claw sections there, and then we can just take our claws that we have and then parent them to the foot with keep offset. So now you can see that we have our basic bone structure for our leg set up. Now to fix the rolls on these, we're just going to alt click and set this one back to 0, so those rotate. And then I roughly want these to line up in its orientation to the bone. So maybe -15 feels like that's pretty good for this one. And then for this guy here, we're just going to set our roll. Let's set him back to 0 to begin with, and then we can rotate from there. So maybe again like 30, 33 is pretty good, or 30. Let's try 30. Yeah, so that's pretty good for the orientation of the bones and the rolling and everything set up there. So we're just trying to align these perpendicular to the different pieces. So now we have this kind of set up. What we can do is actually we'll just set the bones here a little bit better. So I'm just going to come into here and we'll just do a cursor to selected for that one. So we can just go into top view, and then here we can move that to the cursor. And then for this one, we'll do the same with this guy. And then we'll just make sure that there's no roll set on these bones. That should be good. And we can do the same. Let's come out of edit mode here. We'll just do the same for these guys. So let's move that there. So positioning bones is usually a very similar process. Once you kind of get into the flow of things, it's just about finding the place where you want to rotate the object and then actually coming in with the bones there. So that's set everything up. Now I can actually come in and parent these different objects to these bones. So we'll start kind of from the bottom going upwards. So the first thing to do is come into pose mode and then jump into the claw and parent the claw. And then for this guy, we'll do the same here. And then you can easily just really quickly test that as well by just rotating the bone quickly and check that everything is working. So we can just come through that same process with these guys. So there's a little bit of repetition with this. It's like, so I'm not going to cover how to do every other leg because it's basically the same process, but just duplicated. So we'll do this first one and then we can show that process. So yeah, so now we have these guys. We can just test. That's all looking pretty good. Yeah, and then we can just do an Alt-R to reset those. And then we'll come into this guy and we're going to let's come into object mode. Oops. and just do the bone for that one. And then here, and then here as well, select that one. Okay, and then finally we should be able to do the tibia. So select this one. Let's come out of pose mode, select the bone, do this. And then for this guy, same thing. So come out of that and then parent. Okay, so now we should have a working leg rig. This is just an FK rig, so you can see that we can move these different areas around and everything is going to rotate, right? You can see that we can do these individual ones here. Okay, so now we've set this up. What we want to do next is set up the IK rig. Okay, for the IK rig, it's going to be pretty straightforward. So what I want to do here is I want to have a bone which is allowing me to move the foot location here and actually mean that I can rotate the leg and move the leg all in one go without having to individually rotate these bones. So when I refer to FK, what I mean is that FK is basically stands for forward kinematics, which means that if I want to orientate everything, I have to basically rotate each one of these bones individually to get the position that I want. Whereas with IK, I can move one bone and it will move subsequent bones at the same time. So that's the process I want to set up now. And so to do that, the first thing I'm going to do here is I want to basically extrude a bone out from roughly where the foot is. So we'll select that bone and then we're just going to unparent this. So we'll do a clear parent and we can just move this bone up. So this is going to be our foot IK. And so if I just select the foot and we just change that to foot IK, we can also give this a .L for left foot as well. So that's our foot IK. And so we want to be able to move this guy around and actually orientate the rest of the leg, right? So now we set up the IK bone for the foot. We're also going to set up a control for our knee joint here as well. So we're just going to extrude out a bone from this socket here, and then we'll just do the same thing. We're just going to clear parent and disconnect these. So that's these guys set up, and then what we want to do is add some control to be able to actually use this as an IK, right? So the first thing we want to do is we want to come over into pose mode, and we're going to select this foot bone that we have here, and under bone constraint, which is the blue icon here, we're going to select inverse kinematic. From this, it's going to change the bone color to be orange. From this, we're going to click the eyedropper and pick our armature, and then this bone here we have renamed that to foot IK. So we're going to select the foot IK bone. And so what you'll see now is that as you move this around, the rest of the rig is moving with it, right? But you can notice that it also is moving the body in other parts, right? So that's because the chain length is set to 0, and we want to set our chain length to the amount of bones in the leg that it's being influenced by. So if we count those, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in this case, we would set this to 5. And now as we move this guy, you can see that it's moving the rest of the leg. We want to set up control for the knee. It's really straightforward as well. We'll click the eyedropper, and then you'll click the bone here for the knee. This is actually not named very well, so I'm going to just rename this knee underscore IK.L. Okay. And then for this, we'll come back into our bone, and now we'll select our knee here. This is probably going to jump to a weird orientation, so you just need to change the pole angle until it comes back around. So we'll set that to 180, and now what we can do is we can move our knee and see that this guy is going to rotate. I actually think for my version of the legs, I didn't even use a knee in the end, because I found that sometimes it would rotate it to kind of odd orientations. So I actually left the knee out because I just had a little bit more control over that. But that is how you set up the knee if you want to have that control there. It is pretty useful to be able to do that. So we can just set this up and then just make sure that you set your orientation or rotation to, I think in this case, lining that back up with the bone, it seems to be maybe 170 or 169 that it seems to be giving me a pretty good kind of orientation there. So now the knee is gonna definitely work how it should be. So that might just be the trick there, getting that knee to work. So I want these guys to basically parent to maybe the body. So we'll just do that. So what would happen is when I move the body bone, this will also move everything else with it, right? So that's one way to go. That will allow you to move the legs at the same time. The other option is to just unparent these completely. So if we do that here, then what will happen now is when we move the body bone, you'll see that the leg will kind of naturally move around with it, which is quite cool. So sometimes that's something that you could also do. And then move these guys. We could parent these to the root, for example. So you have a couple of different options depending on the behavior that you want when it comes to moving stuff around. So here we can move all of this stuff, and then when we move the body, and I think this is the result that I went for, but it just means that you then need to individually kind of animate or keyframe these bones as you're working. So if you're moving the legs around, you need to keyframe the legs. If you move the body kind of upwards, you would also need to move these guys with it, right? So just something to keep in mind, like as you're working with the with this stuff. Another thing that can also be pretty nice is that ideally we would want to turn off some of these bones that we're not going to be using so that we can just have a couple of controls. And so a couple of these bones can be pretty useful, like these claw bones, for example. We can move our individual claws and things like that, and everything. We can rotate these guys. So what we would want to do now is just kind of tidy up some of the rotations and things on these. So for this guy, we only want him to select. Let's just make sure we select all of these, and we will just come in here and set this to XYZ. And then for these, I'm going to just tidy this up. So we want to just have rotation in the Z. So you can see that it's just going to do this. And this one is going to be the X. So we're just going to do this. And we also don't want orientation scale for any of these as well. We're going to just lock all of that. Let's do that. Okay, so now we should just be able to rotate this and everything is working well. And then for this one, we're most likely going to hide a lot of these bones that we can see here because we just really want to be able to move the IK and maybe the knee. And then the rest of it should just work together without that. But there are some options that can be handy. So having this bone kind of exposed means you can orientate from here and you can get quite an interesting result depending on the orientation that you give this. So it allows you to kind of twist around the joints and things there. But we do want to set up a couple of constraints here so that, for example, at the moment, this guy is able to rotate kind of and twist on itself, which we definitely don't want because it's a knee. So we only want it to orientate in the X direction there. So you won't be able to do that by locking these guys. You'll see that as we kind of move this around with the IK, this is still going to kind of twist on itself and things like that. And that's because the IK is what sets our locking in this case. So for this particular bone, we need to come into inverse kinematics and lock the orientation of the bones that we don't want. So we would only set Y and Z in that case. These ones are going to be mostly moving just in the X location again. So we'll do the same thing on these bones. So now what we should see is as we move that, this one actually we want to freely move, but you can see that this will basically lock its orientation for that particular bone. So I just come in here and set those up so you can sort of see that there. So now this will only move in the correct orientations. And then, yeah, so now we can kind of come in and hide these different bones that we don't want. So to do that, we're going to set up bone collections. And so in this case, we have just one called bones at the moment, which is all of our bones. So I will set one up for legs, and I'm going to call this leg underscore hide. And then I'm also going to have leg underscore IK. So now we have those, we can actually move some of these bones into the right location. So for the leg IK, I'm going to assign that one there. And then we also just want to remove, so all of these guys, we're going to want to assign just to the leg and then remove from the bone collection. So if we hide that, you can see it's just going to hide all of our legs, right? And then we can actually bring in these different bones into the other option here. So we can come into IK, and then if we hide this guy, we now have our control for our leg and our knee that we can move around. One thing that is not great is that we don't really have much orientation over the foot. So we can move him around, but we can't really orientate him very well. So one thing we could do is unhide this bone. So, and remove it from there. So now we have some control over, we can sort of twist things around, which is pretty cool. So that just gives us a little bit of extra control to orientate how the leg and the foot is actually located there. For the claws, if you want to, you can also have those separated out. So you could maybe make another collection for claws. Or we could just do leg underscore claw. And then we can assign these guys there. So if we wanted to show the claws at any point, we can do that. And then we can orientate our claws individually if needed. So I didn't really feel like I needed to do that very often. So, but if I did, I could unhide the claw collection and you can kind of see how that's looking. So yeah, that's the basics of setting up our rig for our leg and our IK. And you can see we have some control over the different areas. We can move things around and orientate the leg. And this is going to work pretty nicely. So the process for the other legs is basically to just copy and paste the leg you've already created. So this is why getting the name and all of the different elements set up correctly first is important. And then once we have that, we can actually come over into our edit mode and just select all of those particular bones. We could hide everything else here while we work on that. And then you would just duplicate out the bones. And then you'll have your second set of legs. And then you can come over and parent all of those individually. I'm not going to set that up for the tutorial, but I just wanted to show how this process works. You've obviously got multiple legs to deal with, so it will just be tedious kind of going through the same process for every leg. But it's exactly the same. Just move the bones into the right places and parent them. And then once the hierarchy is all set up like this, all of the IK and everything will work for these other bones. So you just need to set this stuff up first on one leg and then duplicate it out. And that's how you get it to work. And you can see we have our control for our leg there. Hey everyone. So now we've tackled the leg rig and the body and most of our bones. I want to start by working into our tendrils. So for the tendrils themselves, this is going to be a very similar rig to what we did with our legs, but hopefully a little bit more simple than the leg. So we're going to start here just by duplicating one of our leg bones. We'll jump over into edit mode here, and I'm just going to start. We've got 3 tendrils, so on each side, so there's 6 in total, but one smaller one, a couple of smaller ones, and then a bigger one. So we'll start probably with the bigger tendril here. And so what I want to do to begin with is just set up my cursor into this location, and then we're just going to come into the head and selection to cursor there. And then same thing here, but we'll move the tail into the head and the tail into the right places there. And then I'm just going to extrude out a couple of bones here so we can get everything lined up. So next, we'll just select this one and do cursor to select it again and just move this. So the process is very similar in terms of lining up these bones and aligning them in terms of the actual locations of the tendrils. So that gives us our bones there for this one. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to name these. So if we just go down and find this in the stack here. So we have our head bones here. So we're going to call this large tendril 01.L for left. And then we'll just do the same here and just rename these guys. Okay, so that's the big ones done, and then you repeat the same process for these. So in edit mode, we'll do one more of these so you can get an idea for how I'm going to set them up. And then the other one you can do yourself as part of the homework submission. But if I jump over now to just duplicate this, we'll come over here, set our 3D cursor, and then I'm just going to move this here, and then 3D cursor. So you can just see that the process when you start working with rigs and bones for this kind of thing, the process is very similar. A lot of the time it's just getting the bones in place, aligning the bones where you want them to be roughly. And then once you've got them in a good place and everything is aligned, then it's just about parenting the bones to the right pieces and then testing the rig. So it's a pretty straightforward process once you start kind of getting into it, right? Okay, so this is a small tendril, so we'll rename this one as well. Actually, we'll call this one medium tendril because the other one is smaller. So let's do o1.l, and then we can just copy these names. So yeah, you usually have to just go through and do a good naming pass on most of your bones as well to make sure you get things looking good. So okay, so now we're going to just select the bone, and then the same process as before, we'll just go through and then parent that piece to the bone. So again, same thing, jump into pose mode, select the bone, jump out of pose mode. So for this as well, this is a bendy tube. So if I wanted to, I could have added a couple more bones in there if I want a bit more deformation in that particular area. But for this, I'm not worried about the fidelity too much. I don't want, I just want to move these tendrils around a lot of the time. I don't really want to have them bending too much. So I'm kind of all right with that there. Cool. And then we just come in again. So select this one, do this guy, parent, bone. Again, same process. So just repeat the process kind of along the chain. So just usually I just go one by one like this. Okay, so those ones are now parented. So if we go over to pose mode now, we can test that the tendrils are working. So you can see that everything is rotating. And then if you want to, you can also set up constraints and things for the rotation and things like that. That's usually a pretty good thing to do if you want to do that. But I also want to be able to control these. I don't want to have to individually animate these bone by bone. So I will set up a similar to what we did with the legs. I'm going to set up an IK solution for this. So process is very straightforward. You extrude out bones from your last bone here along these kind of lines. And then we would just unparent these. So Alt P and clear parent. And then for each one of these, you just want to give it a name. So we'll call this large tendril underscore IK.L. And then for the medium one, we'll do the same, but just call it medium. And then the IK is the same as before. So you would jump into pose mode, select the bone here. And then under bone constraint, we're going to add an inverse kinematic, select our armature, and then select the bone. So for this one, it's the large tendril IK. And then we choose how many bones back we have, which in this case is 2. And that's pretty much it. So now we can actually move this around. And that should hopefully just influence our tendril. So you can see that we can move our tendril around and position him however we want to position him. So that's that guy. If you wanted to also... This is just moving the tendril randomly, but if you want to also have control for a rotation, so say for example we wanted to be able to rotate this end bone as an example, we could actually set a constraint so that when we rotate this, it will also rotate this one here. So that's pretty easy to do. You basically just select the bones and hit Control-Shift-C, and then you can do a copy rotation. I think actually we need to select the opposite way around. So if I copy rotation and then select this guy, actually maybe I did do it. Did I do it oh no, I've done it the right way around. Okay. And then now we select the bone with the constraint on, and you just want to set your tangent spaces to local space. And then what will happen now is as we rotate this bone, we can actually rotate the end bone. So that can be pretty handy if we're trying to have some rotation and things there. We could also, on this particular case, this looks like it has a little bit of a twist or a roll in there. So we might want to come back to edit mode and remove the roll, like tweak the roll how we want it to be. If this happens, what you'll notice is when we jump back into pose mode, this is going to break. The object is going to break. The position of it, you can see it rotates. So we would just need to clear parent. If we do that without keeping the transforms, that will reset back to its default. And then from there, we can then just reparent this again. So we select the bone and then just reparent again. So now this is not twisted. The bone isn't twisted. So sometimes that can be pretty handy if you need to control that there. So yeah, so that's just a little trick if you wanted to do that kind of thing. And then what I usually do, once I've done with the tendrils, I will move all of the other bones into different groups within the armature here so that we don't see those. So we'll just do the last one here. We'll just do the IK for this guy. So we would do inverse kinematic again, select the armature, and then select the bone. So this one would be medium IK, and it's 2 bones back. So 2 bones back, and then this will now move this tendril, right? And then what we can do just to tidy up the tendrils now is we'll create a folder called tendril hide, for example. And then what we're going to do now is just move our bones that we don't need to this layer and remove them from any other layer that they're in. So now when we turn this off, we're just going to be left with the IK bones. And so we can add another group for that. So we could create one called tendril IK. And then just for these guys, we would move those to this and remove them from the bones. So now we can hide the tendril IK and enable it if we need to, and just move our tendrils around freely. So this process we would follow again for the smaller tendril and then just mirror and reparent on the other side. So that's how you would set up the rig for the tendrils. Okay, so now we have the tendrils and the legs and the rest of the body set up. I want to now work on the wings. So in the final model that I created, I also do have some other sections that go underneath the body and everything. So if we turn off the shell, we have these sections, and then I also have some plates that move around here. We're not going to cover the moving plates, as I mentioned, but we will cover the wings. So for the wing, we'll just enable the wing, and I just want to take a closer look at how the wing is actually set up, and we can show how this would orientate and how this would actually rotate in here. So let's just kind of go through the details of the wing there. We'll turn everything else off, and let me also just remove the armature here as well. Okay, so these are the different pieces of the wing that we have in here. So we're just going to need to rotate these back to their original location. So some of these have become slightly out of whack with their rotations here. So if we just reset these rotations, these should go back into the position. This one lines up here, so we'll just snap that back. So these are the different pieces. This is actually separated out into 4 pieces for the wing here. I didn't cover modeling the wing in the earlier parts of the tutorial, but the wing itself is actually very straightforward in terms of its design and how it's going to actually animate and work. So we have this kind of section here which connects to the body. So if we turn back on the body here, that's in this little socketed piece. And then what happens with the wing is if we just turn back off the body here, we have that connection piece. We have a bottom wing, and then we have a top wing piece here. And the idea was that this would sort of fold out to create this big, large wing. And then from there, this could kind of bend. So if we look at actual reference of the wings from the Beatles, I'll just show my thought process behind that. So here's a good example of the real world reference of these wings actually in motion. And you can see that they also have this kind of idea of folding up here, which I think is a pretty cool aesthetic. They sort of collapse in on themselves to make enough room inside of the shell. So here is also some photo reference of the same kind of thing. So you can see when they're actually spread out, this is what they look like. They're much larger than would actually fit in the shell. And then they have this sort of point at which they fold backwards into the shell. So to make that into more of a hard surface design, I went for something kind of along the lines of this, where you've basically got the two pieces and then a section where they rotate. So that was sort of the general idea of this. So if I jump back over into Blender here, you'll see that kind of idea, right? So I have the mechanical parts and it makes it look like it has some function. And then these guys sort of just rotate on an axis there. So in terms of actually rigging this and getting this to actually work, I did quite a simple rig for that. So let me just sort of go through that process. You can keep the wings in whatever way you want. You can have them sort of folded down like this and rig them like this, or you can have them open up and rigged like this. Just be aware that they're going to clip through the shell in whatever way you orientate them. So you can see here that they clip through the shell. But once they're rigged, you can then bend and collapse them into the shell and have that as the default pose there. So let's just kind of go through that process of setting up those bones now. I just wanted to make sure that you could see that it's not an issue if it's going to clip through the shell. Don't worry about that for now. It's something that we can definitely resolve and fix as we rig things. So we'll just leave them kind of collapsed back in their default position, and then when they are rigged, we can unfold them, right? So to do that, we'll turn back on our armature here. We're going to need a new bone. So we'll just, as we did before, we'll duplicate out one here. And I'm just going to rename these as well. So let me just kind of go through. And this one we'll call wing base .l. Okay, so that's our base. And then I just need to move these. So I want to put that one at the base of this object here. So we'll just snap that there. And then for the top of this bone, we want to put it in this area. So kind of above that. I don't have a particularly good location for that. So what I'll do is I'll just select these faces here. And we'll just do that by seam selection here. And then I'm just going to move the cursor to that area. And then now we can actually just snap our bone. So we have that there. We want to maybe move it up a little bit as well, so it lines up with the next bone that we're going to create. And then we're just going to start to build out a hierarchy for these particular bones here, right? So you can sort of see that there. And then we'll extrude one up, and we can just shift this to be a bit more centralized. And then we'll just sort of align the next bone. So we've now got these different bones, and we can actually parent these as well to those particular sections as we work. One of the things that's a bit tricky with this is it's kind of hard to visualize the bones, which I think this is why it's nice in this case to switch over to something like the B bone for the bending, and we can hide the shell bone. And then for these, we can just scale them down a bit so that we can actually visualize the bones and what we're actually doing. So I just find that's a bit easier with these bendy bones there. So that's our kind of basic rig. And then what I did, so we could obviously rig these right to those bones. That wouldn't be too much of a problem. We can just come into pose mode, select the object, and then parent these guys to this. And then the same, you know, for these areas. So we just come in here and then select and parent. So this is going to work pretty well. The issue is that now I want to be able to bend these wings a little bit, because they're going to conform to the surface of the body. So if they're straight, then they're just always going to be straight, and that's not going to look super great. So I wanted to be able to bend them. Plus, when these fly as well, there's definitely some bend to the wings as they actually are flying. So I wanted to be able to add that control as well. So we'll go over that as well once we've kind of parented these in. So we select this one, and then let's just parent. Let's just cancel that. So parent to the bone, and then last one here, select this guy and parent. So now we should have the basics of our rig. We can actually rotate this guy around to rotate this. He can obviously move and rotate the wing. And then this one as well, we can rotate our wing from this point. And then, yeah, same for this, right? So we have all the control to actually manipulate and move our wings. But as I said, I wanted to add that control for bending. So let's go through that. So what I did in the case of these bones was I actually used Blender's bendy bones. So you can choose the amount of bones that you have in here. If I just disable, let's just undo that. I've accidentally enabled the keyframe there. So we can choose maybe say 5 bones for these. And at the moment you'll see that this is creating this quite odd result where everything is like bending kind of odd, right? So you can see that that's sort of how that's working. And then we would want to do the same for this one. So we can also have bendy bones here. So we'll choose 5 again. And so with bendy bones, you can also choose an end bone and a start bone so that they don't bend up in this way, basically. So in this case, I would basically want to be able to add some extra bones in here so that then we can create bones that are straight and we're not creating this kind of result like we can see here, right? You can play around with the different options here as well as we do that, but let's kind of go through. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go to edit mode, and I want to just right click and subdivide this bone. We now have 2 bones there, and we'll subdivide this one as well. So now we've basically got 3 bones, and these all have bendy bones. So we want to turn that off. So this one we're going to switch to 0 bendy bones, and this one is also going to be switched to 0 bendy bones. So now we have these guys here. We can actually select the end of the bone here. So sometimes you have to just sort of zoom in. This is actually, I find, easier if you have this version enabled. So we can actually just adjust these guys so that the bones at the end are pretty small. And then when we swap back to bendy bone, you can sort of see that there. So now we have these bendy bones, and they're going to work pretty well. As I rotate these endpoints, you'll notice that we get a nice bend in our bone, which is what we are after. So I'm going to go through the same process here just to basically enable the bendy bone how I want to set it up. So we'll just subdivide this a couple of times, and then we'll set... actually, we've subdivided that too many, so let's undo that. Also, I might just disconnect the rig of these parts for now because they aren't... it's not helping us, basically. So if we unparent that, and we'll just do clear parent and reset the transforms as well. So now we can see this. Okay, so now back to edit mode. We're just going to subdivide this one more time. So now we have the 3 bones as we had before. And with this, we're going to set our bendy bones back to 1 and 1 for this one. So now this is looking pretty good. We can jump back over into the octahedral display and just move our bones back to where they were before. And we'll do this guy as well. I'm just going to move that somewhere to the end. Okay, and then jump back over to bendy bone. We can visualize this. So now what we should be able to do in pose mode is with these end controls, you can see that we're able to basically bend our section here. So we can sort of rotate this and bend this, and then you can see that we're able to manipulate the wing and kind of give us a nice bend to everything, which is pretty cool. So now we just need to parent the pieces that we've made to those bones. So what we'll do is we'll select the bendy bone, and then we'll just come over to the piece, and then I'm just going to Control P, and I'm going to choose with automatic weights. And so now what should happen is as we do this, you'll see that, well, at the moment this isn't actually parented. It's creating an issue there. So what we need to do, you can sort of see that it's created the groups, but it hasn't actually assigned any vertex weight to that. So you can see that this is wing base 006, which is this bone here. So if we come in and we select vertex paint or weight paint, we can actually come in here and just hit the weight here, and we'll just go... there's an option for assigning it. I think it is, where is it? Set weight, Control X. So if you do Control X, that will fill this vertex group at 0.06, which is the wing base here, with that particular result there. So now what we should see is that as we manipulate this, we're getting that nice bend. And I'm not too worried about some deformation in here, because when we actually make the flight of this wing, it's going to be very, very fast in the animation. So you're not really going to see in great detail like how much this is bending. And also, to be fair, it bends pretty nicely anyway. That's not too bad. So we'll do the same now with this guy. I want to select this and just parent it. And we'll go with automatic weights. We should see that this isn't going to do any deformation, so that's as to be expected. And then we'll just make sure that we select the right bone. So for this one, it's wing base 005. And then we will come into weight paint. And in this case, we are just going to hit Control X, I think it is. Just make sure I've got the right one selected. Yeah. Right, so there we go. So now we press Control X, that will add full weight to that. And now we can do the same thing as we did with this guy. So now you can see that this is actually parented correctly and everything is bending, but we still have the control to be able to basically rotate if I select the right axis here. So now we have that. I want to just tidy up some of the bones as well in terms of like the orientations. So for this guy, this one is only going to rotate in the Z axis. So let's just select all of our wing bones here. And I'm just going to set this to XYZ. And then for this one, we only want it in the Z. So we'll just do that. And we can lock our move and scale. And we'll sort of lock all of our moves and scales on these as well. Let's just do that. Okay. Cool, and so this one is going to free rotate, so that's fine how it is. This one is good. This one we only want to rotate. I mean, we could do it this direction because you can see that we can get some kind of deformation like that. And we could also twist it like this if we wanted to. So we'll just keep those as they are. This guy as well, we could do kind of the same thing. You can orientate them sort of how you want. This one we only want to rotate in the Y. And then this bone, it's fine. Okay, and then we also want to just set up a new group for wings. So I'm going to set one up here. I want actually to hide some of the bones that you can see here. So we'll do that in a second. I think it's only these first two bones that we basically don't need to deform those. So we'll just assign those here and then just hide them, remove them from that group. So it's only these end two bones that we have, and then the main bone of the wing, plus these deformation wings that we want to tweak, right? So actually, maybe the start one, let's go back to... This start one is actually useful for rotating, so maybe we'll just remove that. And then I'll set a new group, which is just going to be the wings. And I'm going to select, just turn off the hide bone. And then I'm just going to add these wings to the wings category there. And remove it from bones. Okay, so now we should be able to just turn off our wings, which is cool. And we have our wings and everything set up. So now we can just enable everything else. And the wing is rigged in there as well. Hey everyone, so now we've got the majority of our rig completed for this session. I want to basically do a little bit of tidy up and clean up. There is obviously still some work to do. If this was your final rig, you would want to finish doing the legs and then mirror everything else to the other side. So if you've rigged the wing and everything in the way that I've just followed, you'd need to mirror that and then reassign the bones and everything on that side. So this shows all of the pieces that you need to complete for the rig, but the final rig will obviously have a lot more of the stuff actually mirrored and symmetried there. So that's how we set things up. But I want to go over a little bit of organization and tidy up, and then we'll also show how to make bone shapes and assign colors and things to the rig as well. So now we've got this side of things set up. I want to just check my naming and make sure I'm happy with everything. I think the naming, and we can unhide some of the other categories that we have as well, and we'll work on our folders on this section as well. So at the moment we have some of these bones just assigned to a group called bones, and I'm going to rename this body so that we can assign our body bones to that. But there's also the head, so I want to create a new group which I'm just going to call head, and then I'm going to assign these bones to the head and remove them from the body, so that keeps those organized. The body and the root bone is currently in the body group, which I think is fine. We could have a separate folder for that as well if we wanted to, or a separate collection, but we'll leave it here for now. And then anything that's called hide, I'm just going to move to the bottom here so that we can keep everything a bit more organized. And then all the bones that we care about, we can organize these. So head and body probably want to come first. Your leg bones, your tendrils, maybe the wings can come above tendrils. So I'm just organizing them in kind of priority order, so we just keep ourselves a bit more clean in terms of our rig, which is cool. And then the other thing I noticed, so the body and the shell bones, they look like their names pretty nicely. That's all looking quite good. The foot and the knee, that's all looking fine. And then we've got our claw bones down here, which I think is fine. The wings, so I want to rename the wings because we have wing base. So I've started to rename these wing bottom, and I'll just kind of go through and finish this renaming. So here we're going to call this wing bottom 03. So just so we know which bones are which, it's a bit more easy. And then these ones are going to be our wing top. So we'll just rename this as well. So just keep ourselves organized. The renaming shouldn't make any impact to the rig and what we've already parented when you rename things. Having said that, though, it's always worth just checking. So I would just play around with the bones and make sure things are still deforming as expected. So that's always worth doing. There's a bit of organization. Now I want to look at the parenting hierarchy of things. So as I move different parts of the rig around, do those things come with it? So you notice, for example, here that the legs are coming with it. We can see those tendrils and everything moving, but the wings currently are not. They're staying where they are. The stuff that we haven't rigged, like the legs and the tendrils, that's fine. You wouldn't expect those to be moving with them, but the wing at the moment, we basically just want to parent him to the body. So we'll just do that. So let me let me come back over to edit mode, and I'm just going to parent the wing now to the body. And you can just check with all of this stuff as well, just collapsing down the bones and just checking that everything is how you'd expect it to be. These large tendril IKs, we probably do want those to be maybe parented to the head. So we can just enable those two bones there and then just parent them here. So let's do that. So now when we move our head around, if we're in pose mode, the tendrils will basically come with this, right? So that's pretty cool, and we can move our tendrils as needed. So yeah, so that's a bit more of the parenting and just organizing our rig and structure a little bit more, as well as tidying up the groups and the names and everything. Since the new version of Blender, they've added bone collections, which are a lot easier to work with as far as used to have like a layer system. This is a lot easier when it comes to assigning bones to different groups and things like that. So definitely pretty handy. Okay, so now I want to assign colors to the rig, and the way I would generally do that is just colorize the different sections in the way that I want to actually work with them. So with the head, so where things are kind of together, that's the way I would generally colorize them. So you can do that by coming over into the setting for the bone itself and just doing a viewport display and setting the color here. So for the head, let's say we want to set it to be red. You can set colors different for the rig, but also for when it's in pose mode as well. So if you want to do that, you can. So I'm just going to come through and basically let's just unhide these guys, and we'll set different colors for the pieces here. And then the other thing you can also do if you want to select a bunch of bones really easily is come over into, say, the wings and hit select, and it will select all the bones in that group. So that's pretty nice as well. We can come in and just set our colors up for these guys. That one we actually want it to stay as orange. Okay, so now we're just getting basic colors for the different sections. I'm going to also turn off the bone names because they're a bit distracting now, and I don't need them anymore. So then for the leg IK, I would set this, I'm just going to set this up to be a different color as well. I want that to maybe be like a light blue kind of color. And then for this guy, because these are also IKs, I'm just going to keep the color of those the same. So, I mean, you can do whatever colors you want here. You can make your own custom colors and so on, but I'm just quickly assigning different colors to make it easier to understand what's going on. So that's kind of the basics of the color side of things. You can also set up custom shapes. And so I'll go through that process, and then you can do a pass on your rig if you want to organize things. So what I'll usually do for that is I'll create a folder. You can see I've done this here already. I created rig shapes, and then I call them names, right? So if we just delete that and create a new collection here. So just create rig shapes, and then what you want to do to begin with is I'm just going to add a mesh. I'm going to add a circle mesh, and we're just going to move that back to the origin here. We can scale this down if we want. Just remember, if you put in a scale change here, that you need to just reset the transforms. And then what you can do from there is I'm going to model a custom shape for this root bone. So to do that, we're just going to basically come in here, scale some of the verts up so that this becomes like a marker essentially for our root bone. So now what we can do is come over into the root bone here and select a custom shape. So this one, what I usually do is I add them CBS at the start, which just stands for custom bone shape. And then I can actually assign my custom bone shape by doing a search and hitting custom bone shape. You'll see that it comes in. It's pretty small, and it's also rotated a weird orientation. So that's really easy to fix because there's a bunch of transform controls here. So we just need to find which one is going to rotate it. We can just rotate this whatever orientation that we want. So I'm going to make sure it's actually the right orientation there. And then we can scale this up. So if we say we're to scale to 10, we can just hold shift and duplicate that across. So I actually want this to be, if we turn back on the shell, I would want this to basically be as large as the beetle, because this is the main like root bone. So we just scale this out. Maybe a value of 40 is going to be pretty good for this. Let's kind of come back in and just make sure we copy that across. And then we can actually translate and orientate this into a bit more of the middle of the rig there. We could even scale this up. Maybe we'll go for, say, 50, which I think is looking pretty good. And then we can just sort of shift him into the right place. So this would be the bone for that. We can hide our rig shape. And so this would now replace the bone. So when we look at the rig, you can see that we don't see these bone displays. We just see this wireframe of that bone. So if we wanted to select the root, then we can select the root and move it around, right? So we could do the same for the other objects as well. We'll do one more, say, for these rigs on the front. And so for that one, I'm going to actually make a sphere. So I'll turn back on this guy, and we'll just add, let's come back over to object mode. We're going to add another circle again, and we'll just scale this, put this back to 0.1 again, and do the scale. And then, hey everyone. So I just wanted to recap where we got to in this session and what we did in the videos, and then I'll set the homework assignment for this week. So as far as the videos are concerned, we went through recap, and we set up the structure in terms of the folder structure moving forward for our rig. Then we went through some of the basics of creating armatures and creating our first bones and binding different objects to them. Then we tackled the leg rig using IKs, and then we did same for the tendrils, and IK rig for the tendrils, and then we set up our bendy bone solution for the wings. And then we tidied everything up. We applied colors to the rig, and then we also applied custom bone shapes as well. So that's what we covered in this week's content. And so as far as the homework is concerned, what I want you to do this week is to rig your robot and asset. And so in terms of what we covered, obviously we didn't go through every single leg here because the process is the same for each leg. You just have to duplicate them out and reposition them and reparent them. So I didn't show that. So you'd want to finish off the legs on both sides and then mirror them across. And then the same for anything else that needs mirroring. I think it's only the wing and the shell that need mirroring. Everything else should be pretty good. So that would be what I would expect for this week. And in terms of deliverable, it'd be great to show screenshots of you testing the rig as well, or videos of you testing the rig. You can just pull around different elements like this and make sure that you can show the movement of the rig and everything. And then screenshots of your setup and everything would be great to get across in the assignment for this week.